I'm I'm Andy Mayer. I'm the president and CEO of the Chamber, and it's nice to have you all with us this morning. We have a program that is timely, and I know it's going to have a lot of important information, and I sure appreciate Chief Cammock providing it for us. So thank you for being here. This is something we're putting on with Ellen from the Downtown Association. And actually, I guess I better say a couple more things before I kick it over to you, Ellen, which are ground rules, which are, or at least agenda, I should say. Chief Cammock will speak for, half an hour, 40 minutes, something like that. And then you will have the opportunity to ask questions. Please put those in the chat, and Ellen and I will be monitoring them to get them to Chief Cammock. So that's the way we want to handle that. And then, of course, please, would you be so kind as to mute yourself during the program? It's kind of distracting, as we all know from our time on Zoom. So that would be appreciated. So Ellen, over to you.
Thank you, Andy. I want to thank Chief Cammock as well for joining us today, and thank the Chamber for your partnership in co-hosting this event, and especially in the technology area. Special shout out to Jeremy, who's a skilled administrator of these types of things. I think probably everybody here on the screen recognizes Chief Cammock. He is a Mount Vernon native. He has been with the Mount Vernon Police Department since 1989. And I will say on a personal note that throughout my time here in the Valley, which is 24 years, good times and bad, his familiar face has always been present during times of challenge and otherwise. And so it is highly reassuring to have him at the helm of this organization. And we're grateful that you've managed to advance your career and not having left your hometown. So beyond that, I know you have further details about your bio, but that's just the personal aspect I wanted to add. And thank you again for being here today. I'm very eager to see your presentation and share the information out amongst our businesses who couldn't be here with us today.
Well, both Andy and Ellen, thank you very much, and to the wide array of tiles I see on the screen with names and a lot of familiar names. I appreciate you all being here, and really appreciate the opportunity to come before you. Always looking at ways to keep the community informed around issues related to public safety, policing, and really how it affects you. Yeah, thanks for that warm introduction there, Ellen. I feel really privileged to be not only here today, but in this spot. As you said, I grew up here in the community. I went to grade school here. I graduated from Mount Vernon High School. Went to Skagit Valley College. When I graduated from college, policing was the profession I really wanted to do, and I really only wanted to do it at Mount Vernon. I had a fortunate opportunity when I was a junior in high school to do a ride-along down here, and the very first officer I ever rode with was Sergeant Jerry Dodd, who was the chief that retired before I took his place. So it's kind of been surreal to be sitting here, but I feel equally privileged from the standpoint of having a lot of context to growing up in Mount Vernon, what I grew up around, and what the community was like, and then to be able to police in the community in a variety of different roles. I've been on the department now for 34 years. I've served in almost every division that we've been in, and I was grateful when the mayor and council, agreed to put me in this position to give me the opportunity to do it at an executive level. And the department's a great department. Very committed to serving all of the needs of the community, especially our business community that's there. So what I wanted to do today was to give you an overview of what's been going on with the legislative changes, because it has and will change to some degree the way policing services are delivered. And I think it's really important for the community to understand that. so that there's not confusion or misperception. And also, too, more importantly, I think, so that they can maybe know now what their role can be in helping us work and navigate through these rules that we have for society. So I'm going to make an attempt here to share my screen. Like Andy said, I'd like to take the first part of this and just give you some information about it because it might address some of the questions that are on your mind. And then I'll try to watch the clock and make sure that I'll leave enough time for us to certainly ask questions and talk through it. So in the 2021 legislative action, these are just some of both the legislative intentions that went on, as well as views that were coming from the community around policing. The legislative intent is they wanted to address excessive force and discriminatory policing that was being seen and viewed. And I just want to make a comment about that. During the civil unrest that we saw around the state and really around the country, one of the things that was really reassuring as we saw civil demonstrations and things like here in Skagit County, one of the reoccurring messages that came from a lot of the individuals who came out to express their views is that they could distinguish what they felt policing was occurring here in Skagit County and Mount Vernon, and distinguish that against what they felt or believed they were seeing in maybe other parts of the the country. And that was a really good feeling for us, because there were a lot of issues and there were a lot of important issues, and we certainly respect people's rights, to share those, but to be able to distinguish that what they were seeing here and being supportive of the policing practices was really good. Again, some of the other views, they wanted to limit the use of deadly force in narrow circumstances where that might apply. There was views that they wanted to reduce the role of police. They wanted to reduce the scale and scope of police powers, a reduction of resources to police and shift those resources to other areas. They want to expand the rights and power to those harmed by over-policing. They enacted a new reasonable care standard within use of force, which I'll cover in a little bit, and looking at shifting things like drug offenses and mental health related circumstances from the public safety sector to the public health focus, if you will. So again, when you look at some of the laws that were created and you're wondering where did they come from, these were some of the feelings and beliefs and concerns that were trying to be addressed as the legislators moved into session. During the 2021 session itself, the legislature laid out 4 priorities: racial justice and equity, which was police reform, COVID, economic recovery, and climate change. And as I understand it, they were pretty deliberate about their agenda. If you weren't bringing something that was related to one of these topics, they were discouraging that to come forward because they wanted to focus on these 4 priorities. So during this last legislative session, as it related to law enforcement, there were 100 bills that were passed that were affecting our profession. But the ones I have listed before you here in front of you were really the most significant for us. And I'm not going to go through every one of them, but I am going to cover a number of them so that you can get an idea of, when we talk about some of the constraints that we're under, why that's occurring and what it is that we as police are trying to comply with. So first of all, let me just speak to, at least for the Mount Vernon Police Department, we've always, practiced and had a belief in community policing. And this was a strong message that had come through the legislative session, that they wanted to see agencies engaged in community policing practices versus things that they viewed were more oppressive or legalistic, or whatever those might have been. As an agency, and I really think across the board in Skagit County, if you look at all of the agencies, you see community policing principles embedded in all of those. And community policing is not public relations. I often hear that people say, are you doing that community policing program? Community policing is not a program. It's a philosophical belief, and then you translate that into organizational strategies, if you will, to share responsibilities that go into policing, engage the community in the policing that's there, and really try to get to root causes of problems. And a lot of times those come back to, issues of poverty, mental health, substance abuse, educational systems, all those sorts of things that can contribute to it. But there's 4 motivating forces that really drive the Mount Vernon Police Department and what we do. The idea that, we'll never have enough resources here as a community. So
Chris, you're muted.
I'm sorry. I guess I hit the button, didn't I? Anyway, I'm not sure I muted off, but I just wanted to say with this is as an agency that's engaged in community policing, it requires a, a high level of engagement that goes on with community members. So when we take a look at legislation that narrows or constrains that, that can affect community policing. So let me hit some of the legislative bills that went on. The first one is House Bill 1054, which was the tactics bill. And it covered these key areas here: neck restraints, police canine vehicle pursuits, use of tear gas, military equipment, police identity, shooting at moving vehicles, and no-knock warrants. So first of all, neck restraints. This wasn't a big deviation from us. This House bill prohibited the use of a neck restraint as a less lethal tool to stop somebody's resistive actions. Different agencies have different policies on where this could fall. Some would use it as a lower level of force because it is a trained technique that can be applied. For us, it was always positioned in our use of force policy that only under deadly force circumstances would use a neck restraint. So to change this to prohibit it wasn't a big change from there because we already placed it at the highest level. The one thing that was conflicting though for officers, just so you understand it, is that House Bill 1054 said that an officer couldn't use a chokehold or neck restraint. However, as I'm going to talk about in a few minutes, House Bill 1310 under use of force, it actually has a section in there that said prohibited tactics could be employed to protect the life or the life of another person from an imminent threat. So this created some confusion for us in law enforcement because we had one bill saying you couldn't use a tactic and you had another bill that would allow you to do it in this circumstance. I really believe it's important that they have that ability in a life or death circumstance to have an option like this, because if you take the neck restraint away and the person's in a deadly force situation, the officer only then has a limited amount of tools, and that could be a handgun to defend themselves. And the results of that could certainly be more deadly than, that of a neck restraint that's there. But that was neck restraints. Canine was addressed. They wanted to address some issues around what the perception was is harm that canines do in their application. So they started down the road with some legislation, and then they realized there was a lot of issues to consider. So they created a model work group. This is the required makeup of that model work group. So representatives from all these organizations are currently coming together, and then they have until January 1st, I believe it is, to make some recommendations for changes in state law to canine applications. And Officer Zach Wright from our organization is one that's sitting on that panel. So we will see what their work puts forward. Tear gas, not a big change for us. It just prohibited the use of certain chemical agents. One of them, the chemical agent CN, I don't even think that's been used in the state of Washington, and we certainly haven't used it here in my 30 plus years with the department. So that wasn't a change for us. And it limited the use of that to civil disobedience, barricade, hostage situations. And those were really the only applications that we used it for. The only big change for us, if you will, and it's not that big a one, is that in civil disobedience cases or riots, the law now says that the executive of the jurisdiction that you're servicing, so in this case, if it occurs in Mount Vernon, Mayor Boudreau would be the final approver of gas that would be used, or chemical agents. So for us, is just a change with that is as mayors are elected and reelected, police departments are going to have to put in training for those individuals and incorporate them into the incident management process that goes along, so that hopefully we never have to use it. But if it comes to it, the mayor's equipped to be able to make those decisions and choices. Military equipment, this got a lot of visibility during it as well. It basically prohibited use of armored or weaponized military equipment. We have never acquired armored or weaponized equipment from the military programs that are out there. There's surplus programs that allow us to reach out and acquire already purchased equipment that public dollars have purchased. So we purchased things like gas masks and first aid kits, more of, I guess, protective things. We recently acquired an MRAP. It's an armored vehicle. It's not a weaponized vehicle that's there. It would belong to Thurston County. However, they had acquired it through the military surplus program. I just put some pictures there so you could see, because a lot of people had concern that these were militarized vehicles. And the vehicle on the far left is actually a commercially produced armored vehicle. And then this is a one produced for the military. And you can see there's not a big difference in, form, if you will, in how they look, but function. They provide a great deal of protection through their ballistic sidewalls for rounds. We used these at the Cascade Mall when Officer Mike McClory was shot in the line of duty up on LaVenture. We were taking rounds up there for several hours across the street. We had these types of vehicles from Bellingham, Ferndale, Seattle, and we used them to drive in and move residents whose houses were taking gunshots to be able to evacuate them out. And Thurston County actually used it for water rescue because these vehicles can go over quite a bit of distance, terrain distance, I should say, water, fields, and that sort of stuff. This is what our vehicle looks like. And again, transport 10 people, has ballistic protection. It also has FLIR, which is infrared, so we can see at night if we're doing search and rescue. So it's a very capable and important tool for us. This wasn't a big change at all. It just requires that law enforcement wear name tags as identifiers when they're uniformed or out in the duty. This has always been a policy of our organization. Shooting at moving vehicles, it prohibits deadly force unless the vehicle is being used as a weapon against you. And this has always been a policy for our agency. And I would echo that it's been policy for agencies in Skagit County as well. No-knock warrants. This House bill prevented no-knock warrants. We haven't used those here. Again, just similar to the others. I don't remember a no-knock warrant in my career. And we just don't use them in Washington State. Police pursuits. This is where there's a pretty big deviation from what we do. Previously, police pursuit in a vehicle is justified when the necessity of apprehension, if you weighed that against the risk to the community, you could pursue the vehicle. And then along that line, you're constantly be evaluating the risk factors that went into it. Just to give you an idea, in the city of Mount Vernon in 2020, we had 22,000 calls for service. And in that, we only had 8 vehicle pursuits. And 7 of the 8 of those were terminated by the officer before they really ever went to any great length. And the other one, the vehicle, I believe, went into a ditch or into a retaining wall or whatever and stopped itself. So police pursuits were evaluated against that merit. We took a look at the crime. We took a look at the circumstances, the reasonableness of continuing as they went. And then when it became unreasonable and risky, we pulled away from that. Now the law has changed and it bans pursuits unless there's these specific offenses. And there needs to be probable cause for a violent offense, a sex offense, escape, or reasonable suspicion of DUI. Now, at first blush, you might look at that and say, well, that covers a lot of things. That's good. But actually, these like violent offense, sex offense, these are specifically outlined in the RCW. So these are the specific offenses where an officer could pursue that has to be evaluated on that. One of the things that you'll note over here under the assault side is assault 4 is not included in that. And so the concern is, and we've had this happen already, a domestic violence incident where we go to a domestic violence call, we get some of the initial information that a possible assault's been has occurred, but we still don't have enough information to know specifically who might be the offender and do we have probable cause to arrest that offender. So I know there's been circumstances already where officers have arrived, the suspect's been leaving the the property, gets in a vehicle, and then we learn later that the victim's been assaulted, and and now there's not that ability to pursue that further that's there. So I say that because you may have circumstances where, and I guess I'll share a story here in just a minute, where this might occur and you're wondering, why isn't the officer pursuing this a little bit further? In addition to having probable cause, there's these other factors that need to be considered. So the necessity to identify, are the imminent threat to the safety of others? Is there a risk of not apprehending being a greater risk to the community? Is there alternatives? A supervisor also has to authorize and be able to control that pursuit. So there's a lot of factors that go into it, which really just basically mean that there'll be very few times you'll likely see vehicle pursuits. So this is something that came up for me last week. I have a friend who's a business owner over in Burlington, and he got a call from his neighboring business owner. And this is how he had described it to me, because he was asking me the question of why. He says his neighboring business owner calls him, his security camera had gone off. He looked on it and somebody had pulled up with a truck and a car dolly and was looked like they were going to be loading up a truck that was on the site. So he called Burlington PD. Burlington PD went there. Sure enough, this guy had the truck on a car dolly. The officer had gone up and said to the gentleman, "Hey, is this your car?" He feigns that it is his car. So he goes to the truck to get the paperwork. As he goes to the truck, he pulls the pin on the trailer hitch, runs and jumps into the truck and tries to drive off. Unfortunately, the safety chains are still on the trailer, so it makes this loud banging noise as he jerks that trailer forward. So then he throws it in reverse and he bangs in the trailers. He's trying to dislodge the trailer. He then drives through a fence in a construction area, through the construction site, out another fence, onto the road. In the meantime, the business owner is watching the officer who's just standing there, I guess, and again, his description of it, and wondering why isn't he pursuing him and not doing it? Well, he's not, because when you look at the list on this, a stolen vehicle is not covered for that pursuit. And so the officer does not have any authority at that point to pursue. Now, does that mean that these individuals are going to get away with this sort of thing? I would argue no. It's just going to be that it's going to take more time for us in these cases, because what's going to happen is we're going to be using technology like city cameras. We're going to be talking to neighboring businesses, trying to get video footage, and it's going to take it's going to take means or ways for us to look more creatively at putting a case together to identify this individual. But at least he was a little bit dumbfounded on why the officer wouldn't pursue it. But once I explained how the new laws were working and really the intentions behind those new laws, which is that, they're trying to reduce, the third party harm that can come from a pursuit that goes on there. So anyway, once we had that discussion, he understood it a little bit better. I don't know that it made him feel a great deal better about it, but understanding that we would be looking at other means to try to get an identification and apprehension from that. House Bill 1310, the use of force bill that changed. Again, this relates back to some of the interaction things that you'll see differently. So the legislative intent here behind this bill was, again, to address excessive force and discriminatory policing by narrowing when police could I guess physically intervene with individuals. They also wanted to address public safety concerns by limiting the use of deadly force to very narrow circumstances, specifically where imminent threat of serious physical injury or death. For us and us agencies here in Skagit County, this isn't a huge deviation from our current practices. The self-defense or defense of another for an imminent threat of serious physical injury has pretty much been our standard. So that's not a big change. What is a change is there's a new duty of reasonable care standard that came with this. And what that is that when a police officer is considering a use of force and they've exhausted all of their de-escalation tactics, if you will, one of the considerations that this new legislation put into place was they have to consider leaving the area if no crime has been committed, or if it's about to be committed, or may be committed. So we have always, in our practices in policing, tried to avoid physical force where we could, either using negotiation skills, verbal skills, less lethal tools, distancing, that sort of thing. But this new language in here poses an additional consideration that we have to potentially forecast something that could occur and ask ourselves whether we still need to be engaged with this at this point, or whether we need to have additional circumstances. And this is where it's creating some confusion both for officers and in the community when they call the police and what their expectations are. So before this House bill passed, the police's use of force standard was really a reasonable suspicion standard. If I had reason to believe that a crime had been committed, may be committed, or is about to be committed, I could use a reasonable detention to investigate that and look further. Now the law has changed and force is only authorized in 3 circumstances: probable cause to arrest, prevent escape, or protect myself or you or that person for whom force is being used upon from an imminent threat of bodily injury. So absent these circumstances, police aren't allowed now to use physical detention or physical force, if you will, in these cases. So when you take a look at some of the calls that we might get called to, the ones on the left, when you look at them, usually it's pretty apparent that there's either a probable cause issue that's there or there's an imminent risk of bodily injury. So those are pretty clear where you'd see an officer being comfortable and intervening and doing those things. It's the ones on the other side, the alcohol problems, the juvenile runaways, the mental health calls, these sort of circumstances that may be absent a crime, at least an immediate crime. And then there's a question of, is the bodily injury piece, is it really imminent right now? And that's specifically what we're struggling with on some of these mental health calls, because to you as the caller who might be somebody, seeing somebody waving their arms and acting erratic, in your mind, there might be an imminent risk that's there. However, sometimes these people's, history, either their medical or mental health history is such that they may have deteriorating circumstances, but it's not imminent right now. So these are the ones that we are having to evaluate our responses to and looking more closely at. So I'm going to give you a couple specifics. This was a business owner that called in. and said, "Hi there, we have a male that keeps leaving and coming back. Today I called earlier to have him removed and he disappeared before anyone got here. He's returned 3 times since. He's walking around and sitting down with a gray blanket over his head." Oh, and by the way, this picture is not that gentleman. I just used it as clip art. I want to make that clear. His arms are waving back and forth like he is talking to someone. The bottom of his shoes are bright orange and his shirt is tan and he has blue jeans. He is alternating between us and the building next door and then leaving completely and then coming back. It appears this time he is searching for something. We've also had a lot of activity around the business the past couple of days. So when I read this, I could see where the expectation of the business owner is. Police are going to probably come out, contact that individual, talk with them about the issues and go on. But this is now coming up at a time when the officer has to consider, as they go out with that individual, do I have probable cause for a crime? Is it preventing an escape, or is there an imminent harm that's there? And then also consider this new reasonable care standard that says I have to consider if a crime's about to be committed, may be committed or not. So these are new factors that officers have to evaluate when they're out there. So in this particular case, the officer, I believe, did like an area check of it, but it may or may not have met the expectation of the business owner who called in. This was a Skagit County call. We shared this recently with some state legislators, so I'd share it with you. A Skagit County deputy received a call of a suspicious female who had attempted to enter the caller's residence. While en route to the residence, the deputy sees a potential match, and upon contact with the female, she refuses to ID herself and walks off. The deputy then ends the contact because, again, now instead of a reasonable suspicion standard, there's a probable cause standard that's there, and he did not have probable cause to arrest her at that point. Before this law, we could have detained her for a period of time to potentially ID, bring a witness by, or something along that line. So that's where that standard's changed. Now, does that mean that female gets away? No. They go back and they're able to confirm the burglary. Now they just have to go back out, relocate, check with other witnesses. It's just taking more evidence and time, but it doesn't necessarily, mean that the crime's going to go unresolved. This was a suicidal subject call that Mount Vernon had. In this particular case, the caller this was late at night behind Lowe's in Mount Vernon. And the person called in and said that they were going to threaten to kill themselves with a knife. The officer reached the individual by phone and went into a lengthy amount of kind of crisis diffusing. They then called in Skagit County's impact team, which has an embedded mental health professional with the deputy. They arrive, they get on the phone, and they start doing kind of crisis debriefing with the individual. They convinced the person that want to voluntarily go up to the hospital for an evaluation, but just because of the safety factors with the weapon, they want the individual to come to the parking lot, an open parking lot, and then also come without the knife and drop the knife. Now, mind you, as this has gone on, talking for a great deal of time, I think there was some I guess concern with the mental health professionals about where really the level of intention by this person was. So anyway, the subject does comply, comes out to the parking lot, but he doesn't abandon the knife. Several people pass him while, he's sitting there, and he doesn't, engage them at all. They spend a lot more time on the phone with him. And finally, the officer says that we didn't believe there was a threat of any imminent harm to anyone, including the individual. They had evaluated the person using resources from a distance. And because, again, of that reasonable care standard to considered, is a crime about to be committed, being committed, or could be, then, they chose to disengage from that. And I use this as an example because, again, a caller that might have called this in wondering why, police step back from something, or may not even have appeared to have contacted them when we actually did quite a bit of contact with the individual, just because our rules of engagement, if you will, are different. Switching gear, just because I know we're short on time, here's some other legislation that passed. This is State versus Blake. This is the state's response to the Supreme Court that ruled the drug possession law in the state of Washington is unconstitutional. So it amended the state law, and it said that knowing possession of a controlled substance, rather it being a felony as it was before, is now a misdemeanor. And then it required the health authority to establish a statewide substance use recovery plan. And it also requires that the first two offenses that a person is contacted with be a referral for services. So this is important, I think, especially for business owners to know, who might see something, a drug transaction they see, or drug possession, that the law now requires us, when we come to and make contact and confirm, we may not physically arrest the person. We may refer the charges there for review on it, but the first two offenses by law now have to be a referral to substance services. So again, this is the intention of trying to move substance abuse type circumstances out of the criminal justice system and into the public health system that's there. But it could be confusing for people who aren't familiar that this law changed those circumstances. This wasn't a result of the legislation, but I did want to include it. This is the Boise decision that was passed. This was the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals in 2018, and it basically addressed city camping ordinances. And it ruled that the cities cannot enforce anti-camping ordinances if they don't have alternative shelter beds that are there. So now places like public walkways, roadways, vehicles, motorhomes, pocket parks, in these particular places, it took away our ability to do enforcement if there's not adequate housing as a referral alternative. So I know this is something that, especially in our downtown business corridor, struggle with, and wondering, why are people, say, on sidewalk areas. So if sidewalks are completely blocked, or if pathways are completely blocked, that's still addressable. But this Boise decision, if you will, changed the rules for us as cities as well. So it's challenging not only for police, but challenging for our city parks programs and some of our other city services. A couple other quick House bills. In January, police will be required to either audio or video record any custodial interrogation that involves a felony for an adult or a felony or misdemeanor for a juvenile. So this change required us more recently. Last week, I went before City Council to approve moving to a body camera program, because that's really the only practical way for us to do this requirement. That is the body cameras, in addition to some less lethal technology upgrades, was a $549,000 cost to the city to go to. Now there's some advantages of body cameras too. They've documented reductions in complaints, increases in conviction rates, complaints that have been brought before police and then seen on body cameras, or their footage on body cameras, resolves it, type of thing, used in training. So there are very good applications for body cam. We've never argued about that. For us as a community, we've had great I think, faith and confidence in our community. We have a pretty low complaint rate against our staff. And when we've had those complaints, we've been able to use other means and tools to resolve those. So to take the money that we would have put towards body cameras at the time made more sense to put towards things like schools and outreach services and, housing options, crime prevention programs. So that was always really more of where our position was coming from. But now in January, we'll be required to do this. So we'll be moving to body cameras on our officers as well. House Bill 1140 now requires a juvenile attorney access before you can interview at all. So my understanding is they're going to stand up a state public defender call-in line. So anytime an officer has a criminal investigation that they're going to ask, or I guess interview a juvenile for, they first have to put them in touch with an attorney. I would just presume that the attorney, in most cases, an attorney, once they're consulted, are going to say, don't make any statements right now until, we talk, which will, pretty much, I think, eliminate in cases like our graffiti crimes, our drive-by shootings, and things that we're investigating, using interviewing as one of the investigative practices. That will change that dramatically. I'm also concerned about this one in our school systems because we do a lot of work between the school staff and we try to not have conduct violations or things that go on in the school that could be more appropriately handled by the school's conduct system, not end up in the criminal justice system. John Gerondale and Brian Reed, our SROs up in the middle and the high school, do a fantastic job with that. But now these requirements here are going to change that ability to handle some of those on a case-by-case basis with, kids that are at risk. Decertification. This is probably one of the areas that is the most uncertain. Well, not most. This is an uncertain area right now, and the most concerning for officers as far as the what happens with this. So the Senate Bill 5051 now expanded the Washington Criminal Justice Training Commission's authority. They've always had the ability to decertify police officers, but usually what happened there is the agency would do their internal employment investigation, and then if the officer was terminated or recommended for decertification, that would be sent to the Criminal Justice Training Commission, and they would do so. Now it allows a complaint to originate, so a citizen can call the Criminal Justice Training Commission and make a complaint. By authority, they could open an independent investigation. They could temporarily suspend an officer's certification while they're doing that investigation. They could also run an independent investigation separate from the police agency. So we're trying to understand this right now. I was recently on a video conference with the director, listening to how they're going to approach it. And I think they're going to try to work that in a coordinated fashion, because some of the confusion here is a dual employee relationship where, for example, I could do an investigation, I could come to a conclusion, and then the training commission could run a separate one and come to a different conclusion. And that could be confusing for officers, confusing for guilds, all that sort of stuff. So we're working our way through that, but this is a concern for staff that are out in the field when they're applying these laws, that it may not be a civil action that's brought before them. It may not be a criminal action. It could be a decertification action, and they could, lose their ability to do the profession. So as we take a look at all these different individual bills, if you will, really the what is, not complying with the laws that are there could have a result of a decertification for an officer's professional status. And again, I just throw state versus or Boise in there because, again, the Boise decision, if you will, does change how we can, regulate some of the quality of life and conduct issues out there in the community that you sometimes experience. So moving forward, really, as I see it, I've talked a lot about constraints, but I don't think we can look at this from a constraint standpoint. I think our, only is we've got to evolve both as a profession and a profession servicing this community, and we have to innovate. So just some things that we're working on here. A lot of you have met and are familiar with Erin Von Femp, our embedded outreach social worker. We are looking at expanding that service, bolstering that so that we can take and tell some of the public health issues that they want out of the public safety system can be adequately done. We want to try to put more public health resources in public safety, or more non-law enforcement, if you will, into calls. And so shifting it from just a case management standpoint to actually doing some first response and case management. Kevin, our park ranger, has been in place now for a while. He's doing a fantastic job with that. He is not only out in our park system, but downtown, the promenade that's down there is technically a park, so it allows us to use his resources and enforcement capabilities and authorities and all of that in that downtown corridor that's there. Programming as well. He's out. He does directed patrols on the walkways. He does direct patrols in the parks, a lot of the farmers markets and stuff like that. So that's a new capability that's been in place. He came on right pre-COVID, and then COVID hit and shut everything down. So this is the first year he's really able to expand some of the things that intended to do with him, and we see more. We've added new less lethal technology that's out there to address some of the militarized equipment issues. The city has done a marvelous job, Kim Klepian, our IS department, expanding our public camera system. So our abilities to do a lot of crime solutions through our public cameras. We've resolved a number of different crimes over the last few years, just using the technology that has been invested in by the city. It's pretty incredible. Again, body worn cameras we're moving to. I just throw up today. I mean, I don't know how many people are online here, but as much as I would love to have you all in person, looking at taking advantage of virtual technology to be able to connect and relate and share what's going on is huge. And then, not losing sight of the need and the value to have that relationship with you as the business owners in a structured way where we're sharing responsibilities for issues that are going on down in whether it's in downtown or North River commercial, having those relationships in a meaningful way. Some of the ways just the police department, we've assigned zone officers. Historic downtown has its own area, North River commercial, again, park ranger patrols. Our crime prevention division spends a lot of time doing long range planning and programming around needs like that. Our COPP program, which is our Citizens on Proactive Patrol, these are citizen volunteers. I've spent a lot of hours doing directed patrols in our business districts. They also helped us with the security camera mapping that we did. That's a huge tool for us. That's taking your security systems that you use and we map them together so that when we have an event or an incident, not only we just use our own city cameras that are there, but we try to go and find out where your camera angles might have picked up something related to that crime. So we had a bank robbery downtown there a couple years back, and the store security cameras were instrumental in us putting that piece together. We provide business training upon request. We see that as a way to equip not only store owners but staff with knowledge and awareness, but really tools so that you can hopefully reduces fears, if you will, increases confidence to be doing things, and provide you ways to do some stuff. And then also it helps us to work together in a more coordinated manner. I know this was, I think, something that Ellen was working towards was a downtown safety task force or business watch. We've continued to try to keep that off the ground because that's been extremely successful, this program in our neighborhoods. On a city level, we have problem elimination and reduction team. So this is called by city departments when a particular issue or problem grows and it's touching multiple city departments. And so the mayor pulled together a PERT program back in 2018, just related to a lot of the downtown issues. And these are just some of the results that have gone on from that are there. Parks, our parks was really depleted during 2020, just through the COVID times, but now that's bolstered back. So Jennifer Berner, our parks director, there's now a downtown foreman that works Wednesday through Sunday, focused in the downtown area, working over the weekend, responds to issues. There's also a parks maintenance worker working Wednesday through Sunday. Specifically, they hit that downtown corridor. These are all extensions I see of, again, policing an area so that we can address, quality of life issues and crime fear issues that go on. So just in closing, a couple of takeaways that I've had from this legislative process. I think that the priority, if you will, to create significant police reforms was accomplished. I want you to know that police supported the reforms to improve policing. Anything to build public trust, we were in support of. We never agreed with what they were trying to accomplish. I think where we differed was just how they were going about it. And hopefully some of these examples in a short amount of time help you see some of that. From this legislation, it shifted greater citizen control for directing police policy. I don't have any problem with citizen involvement. I think that the thing we just want to watch is make sure that as we're crafting new police policy is don't eliminate your subject matter experts from that, because what we can contribute to crafting that policy is equally important as some of the other views that are there. The ability for police actions to intercede was significantly narrowed, as I was sharing a little bit earlier, on moving from a reasonable suspicion standard to a probable cause standard. I can't say right now what the long-term effects will have on community policing. I just want to reinforce that community policing requires a high level of engagement between your police and your community. And that's not only just with your law-abiding citizens, it's also with those that are either breaking the law or potentially breaking the law. And my bigger concern is as you narrow the police role and powers, and you say, we're doing this to, reduce the potential for discrimination or excessiveness, if you will. And at the same time, you're wanting the police to practice more community policing. I can't help but feel that the more you narrow what we do, you're really militarizing the police force. Because if you narrow the police down to only wanting us to do these things over here, you're only going to call us for the most serious things that are there. And to me, that just shifts us more to a look of militarizing us than policing us. And there's a big difference between policing and soldiering out there. So again, I'm concerned about that as laws are being shaped and crafted. And again, the laws that have been created here were not the individuals who wrote the laws. They were hearing from community members and residents who felt that they wanted change. So if these changes, if you will, if they reflected the desires that you wanted to see, then they're improvements in your mind. If they didn't reflect, then they're not improvements in your mind. Legislators just need to know, how you're affected by these. And so this next legislative session that's there is an opportunity for us to correct some of these things that were there and improve on them. But again, I think that the only way forward for this is ingenuity and innovation. So with that, I went a little bit longer than I intended. I apologize for that. I hope that was helpful, and I'm happy to shut this off and answer any questions you got.
It sure was, Chief Cammock. Fantastic. Thank you. There is a question starting out from Ellen. She should probably read it since it's her question.
Oh, wow. Okay. I just wanted to ask you, Chief, directly, and if you need time to think about it, or I'm putting you on the spot, that's okay as well. But given that private security services actually have less authority than the police department, but in light of the constraints now placed upon the Mount Vernon Police Department, what are your thoughts about the use of private security in dense commercial districts like the downtown area or the North River district?
I always look at layering when we look at crime prevention strategies that are out there. So usually how we approach things is we take a look at things and what can we do that are natural adjustments that are going on there. So we look at things like lighting, we look at things like shrub control, the things that are naturally that change behavior of people, and we try to change it in a way that we get desired users to particular areas and discourage undesired users. Once you do that kind of natural thing, you've taken care of those, then you go with kind of more of the mechanical, and that's your door locks, your your camera systems, your alarms, your target hardening, if you will. But then the next layer after that is you look at your organized things, and those are things that are usually come with staffing that go on there. Thank you for shutting that off. I couldn't figure out how to do it. And you look at things like staffing. So I think one of the most important functions in any business is your front reception person, the person who greets that person right at the door. One of the poster childs I use is Captain's Ace Hardware when I'm out talking. I can't walk into Ace Hardware without a staff member, somebody asking me what I need, welcoming for the day or whatever. And it puts everybody on notice when they come in the door that, hey, somebody from that establishment's watching them, if you will. So when we talk about things and we've looked at areas, organized security has that same level of value. It can have an extra set of eyes that are down there. They may be equipped to do a level of intervention, if you will, that's not quite something that police can do from an arrest power, but they may be trained and equipped that's something that an employer or a store owner or something like that isn't comfortable doing. So I think it has a value in it. I just think that it's important to look at what are all of the strategies that we're doing, and does this fit towards our overall plan as we move forward? And then what measurable results are we looking from it?
There's another question, Chief Cammock, regarding the reasonable care standard. Is it still applicable in a public area? What if an individual is wanting police presence in order to assure safety?
So with the reasonable care standard, with that, all of that is again, is a consideration that an officer has to take into account if they are anticipating that they may use force. So if you have an individual who is willingly wanting help or services, that's no problem at all. We can do that interaction and all of that sort of thing. It's that if it reaches a point or the circumstances change, if you will, that the police might now have to physically restrain them or physically take them into custody, we have to drop back and make sure we're meeting the elements of the law. We've de-escalated things, and we've considered the fact that is it necessary for us to use that physical interaction? Because again, the legislative intent is trying to reduce some of those force encounters, and how they're doing it is by raising the bar on when you can use it and apply it. Did that make sense? Or did that answer the question?
Well, I think it did. And here's another one that is related, which is how do these changes impact requests for police standby? For example, when someone has fled their home due to domestic violence but needs to go back for their stuff, would police be limited in providing that?
Yeah, so one of the things that I think came early on as we were receiving these laws and transitioning is that we were, it was getting communicated out that, police won't go to certain calls, if you will. And what I've been trying to say is don't look at it as calls, look at it as circumstances. So given the scenario you just said here, the circumstances you're describing sound like a crime has occurred. So an officer could do some things like, first of all, I would expect them to probably make a phone call to whoever the party is and try to get more information, because that might substantiate that, okay, we clearly have a crime and now we've met those prongs to be there. They may call and get more information and it still might be uncertain. So the officer may go now to that scene, find out, what's occurred, but then they're going to also look at alternatives. Do they need to do that standby right now, right this minute? Does that need to occur? Can it be done later? Is the other party there? If the other party's there, is there something that we're going to be able to criminally charge them with? If not, then what's the likelihood we might receive resistance and have to use force? Then we would evaluate all of those against, again, the rules that we have to work by, and then make choices as we go along. So we could still go do that. We could still go do the standby to all be successful. Or we could say, hey, we're going to do this later, or we're going to do it in a different way because of these reasons.
Other questions? There have to be some out there. Areas that you'd like to hear just a bit more about?
It's probably 9:30 and people want to go.
Well, they probably do need to make a living. We'll give them just a minute or just a bit in case there's something. But I guess we'll do our thank yous while we wait to see if there's another question. Chief Cammock, this was extremely informative. Thank you. And the thoughtfulness in which you approach what you can do, even with rules that have changed it, are clearly evident. And I think that's exactly what's needed. So doesn't look like we have any other questions. Thanks to everyone for participating. There is a recording of this program, so you can get that, I think, you'll be able to get that from the city and the chamber. So if you want to share it with anyone, that would be great.
Yeah,
So,
can I just say
please.
again? Yeah, let me just say again how much I really appreciate this opportunity. I really wish we were all in person and can do that. And I just want to encourage you. At least on my screen, the box below me is Brent Thompson. He's a sergeant in our crime prevention division that's there. And we can't get this work done and enjoy the community, the quality of life in the community that we all want and expected without doing it together. And so I really encourage you to, reach out with us and work with us and help us, understand the issues. And then also too, in turn, we can share some things to help you and equip you as well. Again, for the quality of life that we all want and deserve here.
That's it. The partnership with the community and the communication. I think that's what it's all about. So thank you again, Chief Cammock, very much. Thank you all for participating. And
Yes,
there.
I'll add my thanks to you, Chief, and also a shout out for Sergeant Thompson and also Adam Walker. They are diligent in their efforts to maintain contact with the downtown, and we certainly appreciate that.
Absolutely. Thanks.